Yes, they're all here and they've all been sound checked.
Thank you very much, Clerk. Bonjour à tous. J'ouvre maintenant la séance. Bienvenue à la réunion numéro 30 du Comité permanent du patrimoine canadien de la Chambre des communes. Je voudrais reconnaître que cette réunion a lieu sur les territoires traditionnels et non cédés de la nation algonquine, Anishinaabe. And pursuant to order of Thursday, May the 12th, the committee's meeting to study Bill C-11, an act to amend the Broadcasting Act and to make related and consequential amendments to other acts. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November the 25th, 2021. Those attending in the room must be masked for safety reasons, and those on Zoom, please look at the bottom of your screen and you will see a microphone icon. You are to be muted, please, until you are ready to speak, and then you can unmute. There is also a globe icon at the bottom of the screen that helps you to be able to go into French or English, depending on your choice. Those in the room know that you can plug into translation at any time. We're not allowed to take photographs during the meeting. And so I just want to ask you one more time to remember to speak through the chair. And for the witnesses, please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone again to activate or to close down your mute button. And so thank you very much. And we're going to go to the first panel. The first panel, you each as witnesses have 5 minutes for your organization. So you can decide how to divide up the speaking in your organization. And so 5 minutes, I'll give you a 30-second call so that you can wrap up, and then we will go to a question and answer segment, and I will sort of tell you how that works by then. So we begin the witnesses today in this round from 3:30 to 4:30. The panel will be Canadian Independent Music Association, Andrew Cash, President and Chief Executive Officer. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Jay Goldberg, Director, Ontario. ICI Television, Sam Norouzi, Vice President and General Manager. And the Society of Composers, Authors, and Music Publishers of Canada, Andrea Kokonis, Chief Legal Officer and General Counsel. To begin, Canadian Independent Music Association, Mr. Cash, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm the President and CEO of CIMA, the Canadian Independent Music Association. Our membership includes Canadian-owned music companies, artist entrepreneurs, managers, publishers, promoters, consultants, and many other solo self-employed entrepreneurs. CIMA supports the principles behind C11. Every entity doing business in Canada operates under some form of federal or provincial regulatory requirements. Online streaming and social media companies, they should too. These platforms should contribute back into the cultural ecosystem they profit from in the form of, among other ways, financial contributions that can be invested in the sector's industrial infrastructure and artists. We think that these things are fair and reasonable, and frankly, a very long time coming. Now, for over 25 years, I was a singer, songwriter, producer, performer, and I have to tell you that rarely a day passed when I didn't think, how can I build an audience outside of Canada? That's because the music I was making often didn't fit into the narrow confines of Canadian radio formats at the time. Sometimes it did, but usually it didn't. And it was pretty clear that in order to survive, make a living, raise a family, in other words, have a middle-class income and life, I had to find a global audience for my songs, which, by the way, I never quite found. But today, because of a number of factors, including the opportunities created by streaming and social media platforms, more and more of our artists and labels are building that global audience, where in the past, they would have had no commercial avenue. And I think that may be why 75% of all Juno nominees this year were from the Canadian-owned independent sector. And many are finding audiences in markets all over the world. Now, this growth is made possible also by important public investments into the industrial infrastructure of the Canadian-owned sector, through Factor and Music Action. This is a huge success story and a reminder of the importance and potential impact of additional funding from new digital platform partners to the system. Now, too often when we talk about creators, we tend to hold up the exception as the rule. The uber successful influencer on Instagram, the number of streams Drake has amassed this month, or the hit bands that underpin the CanCon structure of terrestrial radio. But they don't tell the true story or the whole story. It has always been and continues to be a precarious feast or famine life for 95% of those who work in the creative arts, both on and offline, including, alas, Juno nominees. But we do have an incredible opportunity here now to begin to lay a new foundation to build and grow a more stable middle-class arts and culture sector in Canada. And so, we must really understand the sector we are attempting to legislate and regulate, the opportunities for our artists and Canadian-owned labels if we get it right, and the serious ramifications if we get it wrong. CanCon was put in place to build a domestic industry for a domestic market. Today, we need to invest in the success of Canadian companies and artists for a global market. For CIMA members, the best way for Canadian artists to be discovered is to have incredible artists supported by excellent, smart, well-resourced, and highly competitive companies that can succeed in the global marketplace with IP ownership remaining in Canada. And we applaud anything in this bill that successfully facilitates these goals. An outcome that results in Canadian artists locked into Canadian-only playlists and a Canadian-only digital ecosystem would be unacceptable. How music is promoted and shared by music fans on social media platforms has become key to the growth of Canadian-owned independent music. And so we agree with and support the comments by the Minister and the Chair of the CRTC, who have both said that so-called user-generated content would not be regulated. Today, music companies have commercial relationships with platforms. Therefore, we must ensure that the cost of the financial contributions a platform may require to
30
make
seconds.
will not be passed on to Canadian-owned independent labels or artists, and that those contributions are not tied to what content is or is not in the bill. The music business has always been complicated and even more so now. And we want to ensure that creators who are impacted by C11 are consulted and that our voices are heard when this bill gets to the CRTC. I'd like to also underline CIMA's support for CDEC's amendments as well as for the Racial Equity Media Collective submission and suggested amendments, which would ensure that the government's stated objective to see greater equity and inclusion in the broadcasting system is achieved. We look forward to building stronger partnerships between artists, Canadian-owned labels, platforms, and the cultural policy objectives of the government of Canada.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cash. Yeah. Cash. And now I move to the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Jay Goldberg, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. I'm very grateful to be here today to speak on behalf of tens of thousands of supporters, including tens of thousands of Canadians who have signed our petition calling on the government not to move forward with Bill C11. Now, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation is concerned with this bill for 3 key reasons. First, the government's empower the CRTC now, give guidance of later approach, raises major concerns about accountability. There are many Canadians who are asking, why is the government trying to give such unprecedented power to an entity like the CRTC without first sharing with Canadians exactly how much power and exactly on what basis it plans to do so? The government has said that instructions and guidance will come later, but that's a backward approach when it comes to accountability. Second, contrary to the government's assertions, the CRTC has determined that user-generated content will be regulated by the CRTC under Bill C11 through broadcast regulation. As Professor Michael Geist has said, no other democratic country regulates user-generated content in this manner, and to do so is a major threat to individual freedom. Again, many are asking why the government wants to give the CRTC the power to regulate user-generated content while at the same time saying that it's not. Before I move to my third point, let me note that although the government has insisted user-generated content won't be regulated. CRTC Chair Ian Scott told this committee that, quote, Section 4.2 allows the CRTC to prescribe by regulation user-uploaded content subject to very explicit criteria, unquote. In addition, the very fact that user-generated content would be regulated demonstrates that this bill is not, as the minister and others have suggested, solely about Canadian culture. Number 3, this could set a very dangerous precedent for the future. Today, this new government regulatory machine that is being built plans to filter content based on what it considers to be Canadian, but this could be repurposed in the future for other means. Not being able to hold the CRTC accountable in determining what is or is not Canadian content may concern some, but not being able to hold it accountable on future issues, such as social cohesion, as Minister Mendicino has alluded to in the online harms conversation, is even more concerning. There's also deep concerns about the process of this legislation, the lack of debate, and the government failing to genuinely listen to Canadians. Our right to free speech and free expression must be sacred, and we should not be in a situation in which a bill like this is being pushed through Parliament in this way with such limited debate and opportunity. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to your questions.
Oh, thank you. That was wonderful. You were 3 minutes and a half. Thank you very much, Mr. Goldberg. I now go to the ICI television, Mr. Nourouzi, for 5 minutes, please.
Bonjour, Madame la Présidente et chers membres du comité. Mon nom est Sam Nourouzi et je suis présent aujourd'hui pour représenter ICI Télévision. ICI est une station de télévision indépendante multiethnique basée à Montréal qui offre une programmation originale en 15 langues desservant plus de 18 communautés ethnoculturelles. ICI est disponible sur tous les services de base de câble et de satellite, en plus d'être offerte sur les ondes hertziennes dans le Grand Montréal. Depuis le 1er septembre 2017, en partenariat avec Omni Regional, ICI est disponible sur tous les services de base à travers le Québec.
Point of order.
Yes, I do not know. Point of order.
It's just an issue with the translation. We're not getting English translation.
Oh, I'm sorry. I am getting it. Could we suspend while that is fixed, please, clerk?
I'm told that it is back on.
It is back on?
English interpretation testing 1 2 3.
It's on?
It's on.
Okay, thank you. Continue, Mr. Nourouzi.
I'm here today because of a critical gap in Bill C-11 that could see millions of Canadians lose access to their beloved public interest TV channels over the next few years. We are one of those channels. Pour de nombreuses communautés
For many ethnic communities, EC Television is the only source of television that they can turn to for local programming.
Many ethnic communities in Quebec, EC Television is the only source they can turn to for local TV programming in their own language at little to no cost to them.
Our programs are developed by a network of local independent producers with deep ties to their communities and decades of experience producing quality TV programs.
From a local perspective and connect people in Montreal and throughout Quebec to what is happening around them. We make a difference, but telling local stories requires resources. To help keep the lights on, we rely on an order by the CRTC that requires all cable and satellite services to carry our programming as part of their basic TV package and to pay a fixed rate tied to their number of subscribers. ICI is one of a small number of specialty channels that relies on the CRTC in this way. These channels are known as 91H services, a name which comes from the section of the Broadcasting Act allowing the CRTC to issue these orders in support of public interest programming. You know many of these channels. Let me share a few examples. There's CPAC, which provides Canadians with unfiltered access to Parliament and committee meetings, just like this one. APTN, which tells the stories of Indigenous peoples in Canada in their own voice. Ami TV and Ami Télé help Canadians living with disabilities access TV programming. TVA
TVA has a mandatory distribution order outside of Quebec which supports official language minority communities.
And together with our partner Omni Regional, ICI provides Canadians with information and entertainment in their own language, including 6 daily newscasts in 6 languages from a Canadian perspective. Canada's public interest TV plays a critical role in serving racialized and marginalized communities. We promote tolerance, diversity, and inclusion. We help protect our democracy from disinformation. With more Canadians shifting to online streaming, we need our broadcasting rules to keep up. As Ian Scott told you earlier this week, Bill C-11 doesn't extend the rules for 918 services to online streaming. Instead, it leaves our future to good faith negotiations. But global web giants like Amazon, Google, and Apple know they won't make money off of our content. They have no real incentive to negotiate, and we can't compete with their legal departments. That is why we are asking you to amend C-11 to help level the playing field and allow the CRTC to set terms and conditions for programming in their online distribution. Donner au CRTC
Giving the CRTC the power to set terms for distribution of online distributors.
change so that we can keep our lights on and serve Canadians in a way that meets their needs.
30 seconds.
Whether that is over the air, through cable, or satellite, or online. I ask you to consider the racialized and marginalized communities that rely on us. These Canadians need to act now and amend C-11 to protect the future of Made in Canada public interest television. Merci.
Thank you. It will be my pleasure to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nurozi. And then I go to the Society of Composers, Authors, and Music Publishers of Canada, Andrea Kokonis, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you and good afternoon. My name is Andrea Kokonis. I am General Counsel at SOCAN. I am pleased to appear before this committee in support of C-11, the Online Streaming Act. SOCAN congratulates the government on tabling of Bill C-11. The bill delivers on the minister's promise to regulate online streaming services while excluding its application to individual content creators. This represents a big step in the right direction for Canadian creative sector and for Canadian audiences. Modernizing Canada's broadcasting legislation today is necessary. The Broadcasting Act was enacted long before the internet became a dominant platform for the delivery of music. Online streaming has experienced explosive growth in recent years, but Canadian songwriters and composers are not benefiting from that growth. This inequity is due in part to the fact that the streaming services that have benefited greatly from operating in Canada are not required to contribute to Canadian culture. SOCAN itself has experienced considerable growth in revenues from online streaming. In 2021, SOCAN collected $416 million on behalf of Canadian and foreign rights holders, of which $100 million was from digital sources. SOCAN's collections from digital platforms will soon overtake collections from more traditional sources, such as radio and television. Unfortunately, only a fraction of this digital licensing revenue stays in Canada. For every dollar generated from Canadian and TV and radio broadcasters, approximately 34 cents is distributed to Canadian songwriters and composers. But of the revenues generated from online streaming services, only 10 cents is distributed to Canadians. The situation is even more dire for Francophone songwriters and composers, who receive only 1.8 cents per dollar generated from online streaming services, as compared to 7.4 cents from Canadian broadcasters. The difference between broadcasting and online revenues that flow to Canadian songwriters and composers is due, at least in part, to the fact that streaming services are not required to support or promote Canadian creators to Canadian audiences. The market alone has not and will not solve this problem. Only legislative reform can do that, and the Online Streaming Act sets the stage. Online streaming services like traditional broadcasters must contribute to Canadian culture by participating in financial support programs that help foster the creation of Canadian music. Online streaming services like traditional broadcasters must also participate in the promotion of Canadian music. Canadian content must continue to hold a prominent place for Canadian audiences, whether broadcast on television, radio, or streaming platforms. Foreign streaming giants that benefit from unfettered access to Canadian audiences should be supporting our cultural community and the next generation of Canadian songwriters and composers. As online streaming becomes the dominant medium for music distribution, that support becomes even more important. It is vital to the survival of our culture and our cultural sovereignty. Canadian music creators need to be actively promoted by the streaming services that provide content to Canadian audiences. Promotion helps Canadian songwriters, composers, and music publishers find an audience and generate revenue for themselves, and so they can reinvest in others. Viewer choice is not enough and frankly misconstrues the role of that online streamers play. Online platforms already decide who to promote and who to demote on their services. They already play those curatorial and editorial roles and should fulfill those roles by showcasing Canadians to Canadians. Online platforms must help emerging Canadian talent get discovered and reach Canadian audiences. It is not just Canadian songwriters and composers that will benefit, listeners will too. We all benefit when our cultural policies reflect and encourage the Canadian experience and the creation and dissemination of Canadian stories and songs. We implore the government to require streaming services to play their part in making it easier to find Canadian music and stories on online platforms in Canada. SOCAN does not propose any amendments to Bill C-11. The bill must remain broad so that it can adapt to future online services whose models for delivering content are not yet known. A bill that is tailored only to services in operation today or that carves out specific services as they exist today will not be flexible enough or have staying power for future of broadcasting online. For all of these reasons, we urge the government to pass Bill C-11 as soon as possible. The creative industry is an important economic sector in our country. The best way to support it is through legislative reform and the Online Streaming Act. Thank you for your consideration. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kokonis. And now we are going to be going to the first question and answer session. It's a 6-minute session. And please be aware, witnesses, of the 6 minutes and colleagues, that the 6 minutes includes question and answer. So again, I will begin now for the Conservative Party for 6 minutes, Ms. Rachel Thomas. Thank you. Ms. Thomas, 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. Sure. My first question here is going to go to Mr. Goldberg. Mr. Goldberg, I'm wondering if you can just talk to me a little bit about the work that you do on behalf of Canadian consumers and how Bill C-11 might impact them and your concerns around that.
Yes, thank you for the question. Essentially, we're deeply concerned about this legislation because it could impede the ability of Canadians to hold the government accountable. And as an organization, we focus on less waste, lower taxes, and more affordable government. Unfortunately, this legislation sets a very dangerous precedent. It allows for this brand new regulatory machine that can filter content based on what it considers to be Canadian. But what we're all concerned about is the potential for that to expand into other areas in the future. It may not be phrased that now, but we have to worry about what governments might do in the future and what ground this lays for potential stretching as we go forward.
So sorry, just let's be really clear here then. When you're saying potential stretching that could take place with regard to how this bill is used in order to require that these different platforms curate content in a specific way according to whatever the government mandates through the CRTC, what are you potentially concerned about? I mean, today it looks innocent. It looks like it's just, you know, the propping up of Canadian content, even though it's an antiquated definition, and that certainly is harmful in and of itself. But nevertheless, beyond that, are there other concerns that you hold?
Absolutely. This legislation sets the stage for the government through the CRTC to be able to decide what ought to be promoted and what ought not to be promoted as we view products online. And so, yes, today the criteria might be Canadian, whether or not it's considered to be Canadian content, although I would note that some of the programming decisions are very outdated. A film called Gotta Love Trump is actually considered Canadian content, while The Handmaid's Tale is not. So there's a lot of problems there. But what I would also see is, yes, there could be expansion. Today, the government's talking about whether or not something is considered to be Canadian. We've heard Minister Mendicino talk about things like social cohesion. We know that online harms is coming down the pipeline. And so we're very concerned that this could create a mechanism through which the government could promote and demote certain certain content, what people are saying, based on standards that are not just Canadian and could go all the way to social cohesion, which is very vague and allows for a lot of room for the government to make decisions like that.
Thank you. And with regard to the bill, presently there is no policy directive that has been given to the CRTC. In other words, Bill C11 is vague in some areas, and it will be left up to the CRTC to determine how they are going to apply the bill at large. And so without a policy directive, it is impossible for the CRTC to understand what the minister's intent is. Now, the minister is saying, well, that will come later, and he's asking Parliament to trust him as he requests that this legislation be moved forward. However, that seems out of step. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So as Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify. If the government is trying to say we're going to create this legislation, we're going to pass it, and then we're going to figure out exactly what the orders are down the line, Canadians shouldn't have to trust that. We need proof of exactly what the government intends to do with this legislation. The regulations, the rules, the instructions should all be coming first. This is a very backward way of doing things in government, to pass a bill, to give all kinds of power to an organization that is rather unaccountable, and then just to presume that the minister, based on what the minister decides at a later date, will just simply make a determination. And because the power's already been given, Parliament has little way to stop it.
Mm-hmm. Now, the minister has said that user-generated content, in other words, the content put up by individuals, is exempt from the bill. However, the chair of the CRTC, Mr. Scott, has said, nope, in fact, it is captured by the bill. Obviously, there's a discrepancy here, which I would say is all the more reason for clear guidelines to be established at the beginning. Do you have thoughts with regards to the capturing of user-generated content?
Absolutely. I've had conversations with Professor Michael Geist, who's one of the foremost experts in this area. And what he says is that there's an exception for user-generated content, but then there's immediately an exception to the exception, which he says throws the door wide open. And as I quoted Mr. Scott earlier, he said Section 4.2 allows the CRTC to prescribe by regulation user-uploaded content subject to very explicit criteria. That's pretty open and shut. That there is room for the regulation of user-generated content. If the CRTC is the organization that's going to be getting that power, and they themselves are saying that they're getting that power, then I think they're the ones that we have to listen to.
Mm-hmm. Now, some content will be bumped up in the queue and some will be bumped down in terms of people using their search bars to look for information. Now, of course, we know the content that will get bumped up is that which fits the definition of CanCon, which again is very antiquated. And then anything that doesn't fit that definition will get bumped down. And it could be even produced by a Canadian on Canadian soil, full of Canadian songs, et cetera, et cetera. But it will not capture the attention of an audience because it'll be bumped to back maybe page 500 of the internet where it's, undiscoverable. Do you have thoughts on that?
Absolutely. There's a great documentary on the Maple Leafs playoff run in 2021. Lots of us love the Maple Leafs. It's not considered Canadian content. It would go down to the bottom of your streaming service, while Gotta Love Trump would be right at the top because it's considered Canadian.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Thomas. And now I go to the Liberals, Anthony Housefather. For 6 minutes, please, Mr. Housefather.
Actually, Madam Chair, it's Chris. I'll take this slot.
All right, thank you. I am just reading from the list I've been given. So, Chris Biddle for 6 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And that was an interesting discussion, almost as if the Charter of Rights and Freedoms doesn't exist in our society. But before I get to the witnesses, and I do want to make a quick apology to them, we had a very good discussion last night about what to do next. And there was a motion on the floor from Mr. Julian, and we didn't quite get to voting. And voting should only take about a minute. And I'll even cede my time. I have 6 minutes. I'm happy. This shouldn't take more than 6 minutes. I'm happy to cede that time back to the chair. But I'd like to put Mr. Julian's motion back on the floor, but also letting us think that in terms of the original motion, this was for a the equivalent of 20 hours of meeting study, or 5 weeks was the equivalent of that study. We're at the end of that, and since we're at the end of that, I'd like to hear from Mr. Julian and Monsieur Champoux about moving into clause by clause, since we've reached the end of that. And again, I apologize to the witnesses. This should only take a couple minutes as we vote on Mr. Julian's motion.
Mr. Julian?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I believe Mr. Biddle has moved my motion, which he's able to do. And that was to have the amendment deadline for Friday at 4 p.m., I believe. And as we talked about yesterday, Madam Chair, of course, that would mean that amendments could still be brought to the clause by clause. So what it does is just prepare the ground so that amendments can actually be prepared and translated.
Thank you very much, Mr. Julian. And so, Mr. Nader, your hand is up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think this requires more discussion than the 6 minutes that's currently involved. I'll make a few comments. Again, we still haven't heard from the minister. The minister will be speaking later in this meeting. At least I hope the minister will be speaking later in this meeting. So, again, until we've at least heard from the minister, I'm not prepared to anticipate or to prepare to provide a deadline for amendments. So I think that's the first thing I would point out. Second, I think it's perhaps disappointing. I'll use that word, that we're doing this in the middle of testimony. We've had heard from our witnesses, but obviously we've only had a 6 minutes worth of questions. I have obviously a lot of things I'd like to ask our witnesses. I'd like to ask more about their interpretation of what they would like to see with Canadian content and what types of changes they'd like to see that, particularly in the music industry. I know we have both Mr. Cash and Ms. Kokonis on from the SOCAN. I'd like to hear their opinions on where we'd want to go with Canadian content. Others have mentioned discoverability. I'd like to see what their opinions are more in depth on where we're going forward, and obviously what changes might be needed or might be required, in terms of amendments. And I'd want to hear from Mr. Neruzzi about EC television. I'd want to hear what his thoughts are on Class 2 license fees, which are effectively simply a tax on broadcasters. Those are some of the things I want to be hearing about. I want to hear about what their thoughts are in terms of amendments and changes to this piece of legislation. So my suggestion at this point, and I will move this, is that we adjourn debate on this motion.
I understand that now that you have adjourned debate on the motion, that the motion to adjourn takes precedence. We have other speakers on the floor who wish to speak to this motion, but we will have to adjourn the motion. All right, so we are continuing. There is, yes.
Sorry, point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Housefather.
I'm so sorry. I think you need to put that to a vote, Madam Chair.
Yes, well, okay, let's do that. Those opposing the motion to adjourn, please raise your hands. Would the clerk please note for me?
I would ask for a roll call.
Would you like this to be a roll call? Will the clerk please go to the roll call? Thank you.
So the motion is to adjourn the debate. Mr. Biddle?
Opposed.
Mr. Coteau?
Opposed.
Ms. Hefner?
Oppose.
Mr. Housefather?
Opposed.
Housefather. Mm-hmm.
Mr. Lewis?
Oppose.
Mr. Nader?
In favor.
Mrs. Thomas?
In favor.
Mr. Upal?
In favor.
Mr. Patzer?
In favor.
Mr. Champoux?
Contre.
Against.
Mr. Julian?
Contre.
Against.
So that's 7 nays and 4 yays.
Thank you. So that the motion is defeated, and we will continue with the debate. Thank you.
Madam Chair, would you mind if I provide you with a speaking order that was there before?
That would be wonderful from the floor because I can only see the Zoom. Thank you.
So there was Mr. Champoux, then Mr. Patzer, and then Mrs. Thomas. And after that,
All right.
Mr. Julian.
Shampoo, Patzer, Thomas, and Julian. Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Shampoo.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would like to say to our witnesses that I am also sincerely sorry that we're taking more time and that we're making you wait. Thank you for your patience. These are things that we have already debated before. I think we've already expressed all of our opinions on this matter, and it should only take a minute. And we should have been able to continue asking questions, but that's another story. I have a question, Madam Chair. I need clarification from Mr. Biddle. I want to make sure I won't be losing my question time when I will have my answer from Mr. Biddle. Could you confirm that I will be given the floor again after I ask him a question?
Once this motion has been dealt with, yes, we will resume the orders of the day for the rest of the hour.
No.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to clarify something with Mr. Biddle, because he was talking about moving to clause-by-clause consideration. What I would like to ask Mr. Biddle is when he would like for us to move on to clause-by-clause. Would it be on Monday? Is that the date he has in mind to start clause-by-clause consideration of this bill? And I would like to be given the floor again after he replies.
Madam Chair, I would mean on...
Thank you. Mr. Biddle, will you please respond to the question?
On a point of clarification, so Monsieur Shampoo can keep the floor, that yes, it would be on Monday that we would start clause by clause.
Thank you.
Alors,
yes, thank you, Mr. Shampoo. Have you
oui,
finished?
No, I had not finished, because I would also like to express my opinion on this motion, which I find very important. So as I said, we have debated this in the past. I think we have all had the opportunity to express our opinion on this. I don't think anyone's acting in bad faith, but out of respect for the witnesses we have here, I think we should move forward swiftly. We all can agree that we have heard the 20 hours of witness testimony that we agreed upon, and Mr. Nader can confirm this. He is the one who came up with the 20 hours, and I think we can all agree that we can establish 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Friday as the deadline for amendments, as Mr. Julian proposed, and then move on to this very important bill's clause-by-clause consideration. There, Madam Chair, I hope that this committee will have the good sense to vote.
Thank you. Have you finished, Mr. Shampoo? Then I will go to Mr. Patzer.
Yeah, thank you very much. And, I think with a bill like this, obviously it's very important to hear from as many witnesses as possible. We've got a few more here yet to go. One thing I would like to just bring up is I would like to see a copy of the motion. I don't have one. There's a few new people who are newer to the committee here, so it'd be nice to have a copy of the motion in both languages before us. I realize there's probably multiple motions out there, so it'd be nice to have copies in both official languages of the motion so that it's clear exactly what it is that we are considering here or potentially be voting on. So I was just wondering if that would be possible to get that done.
Mr. Nader, sorry, Mr. Patzer, I'd like to clarify. Do you mean the motion that Mr. Biddle, that we're dealing with now?
Yes, that's the one.
Yes. All right. Okay. It was a very simple motion, but if you wish to see it in writing, I'm certain that Mr. Biddle could send it to the clerk, and the clerk will distribute it to everyone.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Until we get that distribution, I suspect.
Point of order.
Yes?
Madam Chair.
Yes, so I don't know who. I don't know who's asking for point of order.
It's Chris Biddle. We put this motion. This motion was deemed. This motion was approved by the committee. We debated it for an hour. Yesterday, the motion is before the committee. The motion is very simple. The motion is to set a deadline for clause by 4 p.m. And if Mr. Patzer wants to turn on the translation services to hear that in French, I'll say it again. The motion is to set a deadline for clause. Oh, he didn't put in his earpiece, Mr. Patzer. If you want to turn to the French channel.
This is debate. This is not a point of order.
This is a point of order. This is what was discussed. The motion is valid. It doesn't need to be put back in writing.
I would appeal to
Madam Chair,
your orderly conduct of this meeting. This is debate.
Order, please. Order, please. I'm not allowing debate across every party line in this thing. Let's get some order. Mr. Patzer asked for a copy of the motion that Mr. Biddle put forward, the one that we are debating. Mr. Biddle is suggesting that the motion is already clear. I, as a chair, would suggest that Mr. Biddle repeat his motion and that we have no more questioning about what the motion is. Everyone obviously knows the motion. As Mr. Biddle rightly pointed out, this was the motion that we dealt with yesterday and the day before. So I think we need to just clarify, Mr. Biddle, please restate your motion in English and in French. Thank you.
Well,
I will not allow a point of order on this anymore. Go ahead, Mr.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, but that's why we have simultaneous translation. I won't offend Monsieur Champoux' ears in terms of me trying to struggle through the French. But the motion which Mr. Julian brought yesterday, which we debated for an hour yesterday, which was approved by this committee, which I'm taking from the table, is that the deadline for clause by clause be Friday at 4 p.m.
Eastern time.
Or sorry, not deadline for clause by clause. Sorry, the deadline for submitting amendments is Friday.
All right, at 4 Eastern time, I gather, if I remember Mr. Julian's motion correctly. All right, so we will go back to debate. Ms. Thomas is next, I think. Or yeah. Mr. Patzer, have you finished?
Yeah, no, I was just yeah, I appreciate that Mr. Biddle, spoke the record. I was just hoping that he, would take 2 seconds to send an email around just to kind of catch it there. So I just have it in front of me, but I see that the minister is here now, and I'm just wondering maybe if we should just proceed to now hearing from the minister at this point in time, that we would move to adjourn this debate so we can hear from the minister.
We have a motion on the floor, and the motion to adjourn this debate was voted on recently, just now, a few minutes ago, and it was denied. So we can't move that motion again, Mr. Patzer. So therefore, we will continue this debate. The minister may be here, but this session is due to end at 4:39, I think. It's 4:48. So we still have time in this session. Thank you.
Next.
Continue. Ms. Thomas, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, it was not actually, a decision wasn't reached yesterday as to whether or not a copy of this motion would be provided in writing. There have been other instances at this committee where you have deemed it necessary to provide that. I'm unsure as to why that is a protocol or a practice at some of these meetings when some motions are moved, but not at others. So, for example, just a couple of days ago, I moved a motion at this committee, and I was asked to provide it in writing, which I was able to do. I was also able to provide it in both official languages without a problem. It was promptly given to each member around this table, and we were able to move forward with debate. In the same way, my colleague, Mr. Patzer, who is sitting on this committee as a sub, and so he has not seen the amendment, he is not familiar with the debate that took place yesterday, he has put forward a very reasonable request, which is that this motion would be made available to him in writing. Further to that, why that is so necessary is because I listened to Mr. Biddle work his way through some part of the motion or rendition of the motion, and then Mr. Julian did the same, and so it is unclear to myself, and I believe to others, as to what exactly this motion is. And again, I would appeal to you to please be consistent, and if this is something that is expected at some committee meetings with some motions, then I do believe that it needs to be asked for in all committee meetings and all motions. Madam Chair, I am not done.
Ms. Thomas, you asked me a question. May I be allowed to answer it, please?
Yes, I'm just finishing that question, Madam Chair. Just one moment.
Go ahead,
So
then.
I would ask you then to, like I said, exercise the same, or I guess make sure that the same protocols are followed here as you've asked for at other meetings. I will allow you to respond, and then I would like to note, however, that I currently have the floor.
I will respond. There is no need because the issue that we are discussing in the orders of business here is C11. The motion pertains to C11. There is no need to give 48 hours in both languages for this. When a motion is simple, and it is my understanding that this is a very simple one-sentence motion, there is, most people will understand what it is by now because this is going to be the third time we're hearing this motion. When a motion is very long and complicated, it is necessary for people to read it because they may not understand everything that had been said. So as a chair, I make that decision based on the complexity and length of the motion as opposed to a very short and simple motion that we are now hearing for the fourth time. Thank you. Continue, Ms. Thomas.
So, Madam Chair, I understand the words of your ruling. However, I would like to highlight a couple of things. First, the motion is still unclear to myself and to my colleagues who are subbed in at this meeting. And so greater clarity is in fact required if we are expected to vote on this. It is improper and undemocratic to expect us to vote on something that is not clearly stated. And of course, the written language is what assists us best in that way.
Rappel au règlement, Madame la Présidente.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Shampoo, point of order. Yes.
Oui, Madame la Présidente.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Read the motion because she has it right now in the minutes.
Madame la Présidente, je suis dans un rappel.
Madam Chair, may I proceed with my point of order? I hear my colleague, Mrs. Thomas. And even though we're not on the same page for a long list of things, I can't imagine for a single second that this motion requires that much clarification for her. As we've heard, the minister is here, and we do want to ask him questions. We have another witness here with us. We want to ask him questions. We have an extremely simple motion of 4 p.m. Eastern Time this Friday as a deadline to send in amendments. My goodness, this is not appropriate, Madam Chair. So I would ask my Conservative colleagues to show respect to our witnesses who are here to answer important questions on Bill C-11, that those colleagues allow us to move on to a vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shampoo. Well, there's a call for the vote. I have, as Mr. Shampoo asked for, and so once again, we are asking for this motion to come to the floor and be voted on, and I need to know if there is a majority approval of this meeting. Is anyone opposed to this happening now? The motion coming to a vote.
Madam Chair, there is still a speaking list that does need to be heard from before you can call a vote.
Yes, I have Mr. Clerk, will you please...
Yes, Madam Chair. So there is still a speaking list, so the debate could
Yes,
procedurally resume. I do have the written the motion written in both languages. We're working on distributing it to the members, so we can distribute it shortly to all the members.
Thank you very much, Clerk. I will let you carry on with that, and I need to know who, other than Mr. Upal, is on the list right now.
Yes. So you still had after Mrs. Thomas, you had Mr. Julian, then Mr. Upal, and then Mr. Perkins.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Julian.
So Mrs. Thomas was interrupted by a point of order, so she's still on the list.
Ms. Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to the clerk for doing up that motion. That's wonderful. I would like to move an amendment. I don't know what the motion is, so I'll just take that after the first word, you scratch off everything. Actually, no, sorry. Perhaps before moving my amendment, perhaps the clerk could clarify and just read the motion into the record for my reference.
Clerk?
Yes, so I can read it in both languages? Is that okay?
Yes, please. That would be preferable.
So that the deadline for amendments on C11 be at 4 p.m. on Friday, June 2nd. On Friday, June 3rd, sorry. Que la date limite pour les amendements.
That the deadline for amendments on C11 be at 4 p.m. Friday, June 3rd.
Heure de l'Est, so
Eastern Time.
Thank you. You have heard the motion being read clearly in English and French. Ms. Thomas, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I would move an amendment then to that motion. And my amendment would be that we delete all words after that and replace them with the deadline, that amendments be due 3 days before clause by clause begins.
We do not have a deadline for clause by clause. Ms. Thomas, would you like to clarify your amendment, please?
I didn't state that there was a deadline. I simply said that amendments are due 3 days before clause by clause begins.
That is a completely new motion. I can't say that it's an amendment to the current motion on the floor. So I would have to ask for you to, for us to move and continue with the amendment on the floor now before you can bring a new motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would ask with all due respect that you consult with the clerk.
Yes, I think I know the rules, but go ahead. Clerk, will you please respond? Can Ms. Thomas move a new motion that is completely different from the intent of the current motion on the floor? I am ruling that her motion is out of order at the moment.
Point of order. Point of order.
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
Point of order.
Madam Chair, point of order.
Point of order.
Excuse me. I don't know. You know that you should say your name before you request a point of order. I have no idea who is
Tim
asking
Opal here.
for point of order.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Opal.
I believe Ms. Thomas's motion there does refer to the timing of this. So when we talk about timing, it's 3 days before rather than Friday. So it is not a new motion. It just refers to the timing of the initial motion. So it would be a sub-amendment to that motion, changing the time.
Thank you, Mr. Opal. I think I asked the clerk to rule on this.
Just before the clerk does, it's MP Perkins on this point of order. I don't think it's appropriate for the chair to put a box around classifying this as a new motion and then asking for an opinion of whether a new motion is in order. I believe the proper question is it actually a substantively different motion, or is it consistent with the existing motion?
Mr. I have no idea who I'm speaking to. Is it Mr. Patso or Mr. Perkins or whom?
I introduced myself as you requested. It's MP Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. Okay, I did not know there was Mr. Perkins in the room. Thank you very much. Clerk, will you please rule? I've asked you to do that. We will wait until the clerk rules.
Madam Chair, if you wouldn't mind suspending, I'm just going to confirm something on my end, and then I will be able to advise you.
Thank you. The meeting is suspended, and would you let me know when you are ready for us to resume? Thank you, Clerk. rule on Ms. Thomas's motion. The motion is admissible because it actually continues to set a deadline for amendments. And so this is an amendment that is acceptable, and we will now debate the amendment, please.
Point of order, it's Chris.
Yes, Chris.
I think perhaps we should suspend the meeting, let these witnesses go, and set it up for the minister to appear.
Well, we have a motion on the floor, but we must end this meeting in fact, we're past the time to end this meeting. So you are absolutely right.
Point of order, Madam.
I would ask the witnesses to leave. I will suspend, ask the witnesses to leave.
That's important.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, witnesses, for coming and welcome, Minister, to Heritage Committee. We're discussing, as you well know, Bill C-11, and you have 5 minutes to present, please, Minister.
Point of order, Madam Chair. There's a motion on the floor. The meeting was suspended. The meeting was not ended.
That is, you are absolutely right, whoever made that point of order. And so the minister may not be able to begin because we suspended. We did not adjourn the meeting. We suspended it. And so we have to continue with the business that we were dealing with before the minister arrived or before we began this new session. So we have an amendment on the floor. I would ask everyone to speak for that amendment. I would entertain a list. Thank you, Clerk.
So we have Mr. Perkins on the list.
Mr. Perkins? I think the next person on the list was Mr. Julian, no?
Well, since Mrs. Thomas moved her amendment.
Yes, we have a new list. So
yes.
It's Mr. Perkins. Who else? Just Mr. Perkins right now?
Mrs. Thomas, did you want to speak afterwards?
No, I think we should. Mr. Perkins is on the list, and anyone else can be free to put up their hands or to say they want to speak. So, Mr. Perkins, please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, just before Mr. Perkins speak, Mrs. Tallman is asking if she can have the floor again because you issued your ruling, and she would like to speak on her amendment before Mr. Perkins.
Well, it would be up to Mr. Perkins, who has the floor, to know if he would give the floor back or cede it to Ms. Thomas.
I certainly would, but I think the mover of the motion usually gets to speak to their motion first before the speakers list happens.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Perkins, and I think that we should have Ms. Thomas speak then.
Okay. Thank you. Madam Speaker, since your intention was to hear from the minister, then I would move a motion to adjourn this debate for the moment. Of course, this motion can be brought back after we have heard from the minister.
Is there any opposition on the floor to
Yes.
adjourning the debate? Yes. I don't know who said yes, so can you please identify yourself?
Chris Biddle, opposed.
Yes, Chris Biddle, you're opposed. All right. So then I would have to call you. Well, I guess we're going to have to call a vote.
You want me to proceed
Point of
with
order. Point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Housefather.
I was just wondering, Madam Chair, can the mover of a motion move to adjourn debate on their own motion right after they've proposed it? I don't think that's the case.
There is no clear ruling on that, Mr. Housefather, but perhaps I will entertain the clerk's advice on this.
I believe they can. I'm just waiting for confirmation.
Yes, I think they can.
Madam Chair, I have confirmation that a mover can move the motion to adjourn debate on their own motion. You are on mute, Madam Chair.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I thought that was a ruling that she could move to adjourn her own or to postpone her own debate. So the question is, I have opposition on the floor right now from Mr. Biddle. So I will call the question with regard to this motion to adjourn, which is not debatable, by the way. So let's just call the question, please.
So the motion is to adjourn debate on Mrs. Thomas' amendment. Mr. Biddle?
Opposed.
Mr. Cotto?
Opposed.
Ms. Hefner?
Opposed.
Mr. Housefather?
Opposed.
Mr. Lewis?
Opposed.
Mr. Perkins?
In favor.
Mrs. Thomas?
In favor?
Mr. Upal?
In favor.
Mr. Patzer?
In favor.
Monsieur Champoux?
Je m'oppose à la motion.
I'm against the motion.
Julian?
Contre.
Against.
So that's 7 nays and 4 yeas.
Thank you. So the debate is not adjourned, and I think we need to go back to the floor. Ms. Thomas.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Sure. I I'm a little bit surprised at my colleagues. Certainly, it seems that they would perhaps be playing shield or defense on behalf of the minister, preventing the opportunity from him speaking and being asked questions to speak to this piece of legislation.
This is debate on your motion to adjourn. Can you please continue now with your actual motion? Thank you. We have decided it is not allowed to be adjourned, so can you continue to speak to your amendment, please?
Sure, Madam Chair, I'd love to. Thank you. So the amendment that I have moved is that the deadline for the amendments be 3 days before the start of clause by clause. And so, of course, we're talking about the time frame that is being granted in order to bring forward those amendments that we might have for Bill C-11. Madam Chair, you'll recall that this committee agreed to hearing from witnesses for a minimum of 20 hours. And actually further to that, the motion in its original form said 4 meetings for 5 hours each. Now, obviously, that form has not been followed. We did not do 4 meetings at 5 hours each. Those meetings have been more sporadic and for a lesser amount of time. Nevertheless, we're in good faith honoring that. But the original motion was was for a minimum of 20 hours of witness testimony.
Just a correction, Ms. I have read and reread that motion. There was no minimum included in it. Thank you very much.
Madam Chair, was there a maximum included in it?
There was nothing included, just that there be 5 hours of debate on Tuesday, the 24th, or whatever that date was, and that in the following week that we get 3 5-hour slots. And as you well know, Ms. Thomas, that is not decided by this committee. It is decided by the whips in the House, who agreed that we would get the equivalent of 3 5-hour meetings, which would be 15 hours. And that is going to be concluded, or should be concluded, today.
Madam Chair, I thank you. I believe then with the committee having agreed to 20 hours of testimony, it's not a maximum of 20 hours. It's not a hard stop at 20 hours. It's just simply 20 hours is the starting point. In fact, I can recall that there was discussion around this motion that we could take a closer look at it after we had heard from witnesses for that duration of time. And if we deemed it necessary, perhaps we could expand it then. That was part of the conversation that ensued around this table. And of course, it was done in good faith. It would appear that that good faith is no longer good because there is no longer a willingness from my counterparts at this table to have the discussion around hearing from more witnesses. I believe that that is very sad. Because we still have 33 witnesses that have not been heard just from the Conservative list. And then we have more witnesses that were submitted by other colleagues at this table that have not been heard. And so I believe that it is incumbent upon us to be as thorough as we possibly can be. And so it would be very nice to hear from more witnesses. I don't believe that this request is unreasonable. Again, there are many times where a committee sets out with an intention and with an understanding, again, taken in good faith, that that the work of the committee can be reassessed or reevaluated, and tweaks can be made along the way as more information is granted. And so in this case, I think, sure, we're coming to the end of our time. Unfortunately, my colleagues at the table have decided to move this motion in the middle of hearing from witness testimony. It was first moved when we had stakeholders at the table, and now it continues to be discussed while we have the Minister of Heritage at the table. Again, no doubt, that's a bit of a quarterbacking effort by the Liberal MPs at this committee. But also, it's interesting to me that my NDP colleague, Mr. Julian, I moved a motion that pertained to Bill C-11 at another committee, and witnesses were present, and he was actually quite cruel in many of the words that he spoke at that time. I won't repeat all of them because certainly many of them would be
point of order.
Unparliamentary.
It's Chris.
Miss, yes, thank you. I was about to tell Ms. Thomas that she should actually stick to the amendment that she made. Now, yes, who asked raise a point of order?
It's Chris.
I don't know. Once again, thank you, Mr. Biddle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to point out that the minister, my understanding is the minister is here till 5:45. We really would like to hear from him. Those that are listening need to know that this vote could take 20 seconds, 30 seconds, and we could get back to hearing from the minister.
This is not a point of order.
It's not a point of order, Mr. Biddle. I'm sorry. There was a motion to adjourn this discussion or this bill, not this bill, sorry, this motion, and it was rejected by the committee, the majority of the committee. So we are continuing with the debate. The minister, I am very sorry because I know that the minister wanted to be here to answer questions, but unfortunately, the vote is such that the majority of the committee wish to continue with this debate and not adjourn it. Thank you. So continue, Ms. Thomas.
Thank you. Thank you. So I find it interesting then that the members of this committee now are being permitted to interrupt with so-called points of order in order to launch attacks at me when at a previous time when a motion was moved, members who represent this side of the table were accused of being, quote, unparliamentary or rude or respectful or unacceptable. I find that very interesting and very rich coming from Mr. Julian. When he is in fact...
Can you stick to your amendment, please?
Yes, Madam Chair, that's exactly what I'm doing. Thank you. And so... here we are, and we are debating a motion that it's interesting because it came through now in writing from Mr. Housefather, but it was actually Mr. Biddle who put the motion forward at first and then kind of passed the mic off to Mr. Julian, and then Mr. Julian spoke for a little while, and then Mr. Shampoo spoke for a little while.
Clerk, Ms. Thomas, and then the clerk read the motion in English and French. So we are now clear about what that motion is. Can we please continue with your amendment? Thank you.
And then, yes, of course, that brings us to this place in time where I have put forward an amendment. And, of course, that amendment asks for a more reasonable allotment of time in terms of when the deadline for amendments to C11 will be due to this committee. And so we've asked that they be due 3 days before the start of clause by clause. Seems fairly reasonable. Because, of course, we want to make sure that we've heard from all of the witnesses before we are expected to hand in amendments. And we want, a right allotment of time to be able to go through that testimony that we've received at this committee. There have been many important voices that have been heard here. But then in addition to that, there are also voices that have not been heard at this committee, voices that have not been given an opportunity to come and to testify. Madam Chair, do you wish to speak?
No.
Okay. And And so I'm simply asking, that the committee actually, again, my preference, which would be a new motion, which I'm not permitted to put forward. So I've simply put forward an amendment that I believe is reasonable. But of course, my preference would be that we actually have a fair and reasonable conversation around actually continuing the study at this committee in order to hear from witnesses that have not yet been heard from. That would be my preference. Certainly, I believe that that's a fair ask. However, again, that doesn't seem to be the conversation on the table. So the conversation then is around amendments and when they're going to be due. And so that kind of loops back around, though, in this circular motion back to this place of, well, we'd really like them due later than Friday at 4 p.m., which is now fewer than 24 hours away. And the reason why we want to push that deadline back a bit is because we want an opportunity to hear from other voices. Even today, right now, the Liberal members, the NDP member, and the Bloc member have determined that we are not going to hear from the minister today. And so, in making that
Point of order,
determination,
Madam Chair. It's Chris.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
I would
right.
ask that you truly make sure this is a point of order.
Ms. Thomas, I think I have been ruling extremely fairly, so don't presuppose how I'm going to rule. Mr. Biddle.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. The minister's sitting right here. He's ready to go. The vote will take 1 minute on the amendment and then on the motion, and then we can
Debate.
get back to it.
Madam
And
Chair, this is
Minister
debate.
ready to go.
Madam
He's
Chair,
sitting
debate.
right there.
Debate.
Mr. Biddle, that is not a point of order. I'm sorry. Okay, Ms. Thomas, I would like, though, to comment on a premise that you put forward to this committee, that in the past, when the committee has decided to look at a study and we were able to extend it or not, that was because on all of those studies, there was a deadline motion. It was either a minimum of 4 meetings or at least 4 meetings or a maximum. There was no such thing in this unanimous agreement by this committee with regard to the meetings that were going to be held with 3 meetings of 5 hours each during the week of May the 20th. That has been accomplished. We now need to move on to clause by clause. And you are setting a deadline for clause by clause. Can you speak to that and not to the issue of having more witnesses or not having more witnesses? Because then I would have to rule your motion out of order because it would be completely contrary to the original motion on the floor that you're seeking to amend. So if you're going to speak to deadlines, please speak to deadlines. Ms. Thomas?
Thank you, Chair. The reason for my deadline being expanded is because I would like to hear from more witnesses. So with all due respect, I do believe you will find that on the topic at hand. No?
Well, I would like to say to you that as a chair, I take my orders from the committee. And a unanimous motion was passed, which is setting the tone for how we deal with this particular issue on C11. And as far as I'm concerned, that unanimous motion has now achieved what it asked for. So we are now ready to move into amendments, and into clause by clause. And I think that is where we should be talking and not about going back on a motion that had already been unanimously approved. And I would also like to point out to the committee there's a hard stop for the minister at 5:45. Thank you very much.
Madam Chair, perhaps I can give you an updated speaking order.
Yes, thank you.
After Mrs. Thomas, we have Mr. Perkins, Mr. Patzer, and Mr. Upal.
Mr. Perkins?
Point of order.
To the amendment, please.
I do still have the floor, Madam Chair. Whenever you're ready to give it back to me.
Point of order. Point of order.
The floor, and you are speaking, and then when I
Point of order.
decided to stop speaking. So, point of order. Who is it?
C'est Monsieur Julie.
It's Mr. Julian.
Madame la Présidente,
Madam Chair, I would just like to confirm something with the clerk. I was after Mrs. Thomas, so I am next on the list. Thank you.
I brought that up with the clerk, Mr. Julian, and she said that that was on the original motion. We are now speaking to the amendment. And so, I'm sorry.
Just to clarify, Madam Chair, the speaking order continues when the person signals, and I did right after the amendment. So it would be right after Ms. Thomas.
The clerk did not so agree. I'm sorry, because I tried to get your name up there, and the clerk said no, that we are on an amendment now and that we have a new speaking order. So there you go. I am following what the clerk tells me are the rules that we should follow. Now, go ahead. Now you said you are still speaking, Ms. Thomas. Will you speak?
Madam Chair, perhaps you could just help me out with something here. So the reason I was quiet is because you hadn't given me permission to speak yet, so I was trying to be respectful of you. I seem to get in trouble if I go ahead and speak, and I seem to get in trouble if I don't speak. So perhaps you could just give me some ground rules that I can abide by. I wish to be respectful.
Just try to be respectful. Indeed, not just saying so, Ms. Thomas. Just be respectful. You have the floor. Speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as I was saying, there is still an opportunity here for this committee because, as you stated, the committee is the commander of its own destiny. And so if the committee does decide that they wish to hear from more witnesses, there is no reason why they can't do that, which is the conversation that I would love to have. Again, we cannot have that conversation directly. However, it does relate to the amendment that I have moved to the motion on the floor because I am making that amendment in order to allow for more time so that we could possibly hear from more witnesses. The reason I believe that it is important to hear from more witnesses is because we have many voices that have not yet been represented. For example, one of the things that Bill C-11 is intended to do, or so claims the minister, is to protect or contend for diversity. Now,
Ms. Thomas, will you please speak to your amendment, which is about a deadline for amendments? We are not discussing witnesses because I have a unanimous motion from this committee about the number of witnesses. 10 meetings, which is 20 hours, that has been achieved. There is nothing further in the committee's unanimous agreement that tells me that I can go beyond that. So you were speaking to moving the deadline for amendments. Can you please speak to that issue, which is what your amendment speaks to?
Madam Chair, it is appropriate for me to explain the reason for my amendment. So I'm unsure as to why I'm being asked not to speak to motivation. Would you be able to clarify as to why you're asking me to be silent as to why I would move this motion or my motivation? I'm uncertain as to why that's out of order.
You asked for a deadline, and the deadline specifically said 3 days before clause by clause. And there is nothing about the 3 days or anything to do with witnesses. Your motivation may be so, but I still would like to hear you speak to your amendment, which is a deadline. That's why I ruled your motion in order, your amendment in order, because it did not change the intent of the original motion from Mr. Biddle. Now, if you decide to speak about witnesses, you are changing the intent of the motion by Mr. Biddle, and I would have to rule your motion out of order, so your amendment out of order. So can we stick to what you wish to speak about, which is the deadline for an amendment? Thank you.
Madam Chair, I am not changing my amendment. It stands as is, which is that the deadline for the amendments to C11 be moved to 3 days before the start of clause by clause. In order to talk about that amendment, I believe the intent of giving me the mic is to be able to speak to my motivation. My motivation for moving this amendment is so that we might be able to hear from more witnesses.
There is no motion on the floor to choose to hear more witnesses. The motion that was carried unanimously had a very strong number of meetings, and that is what I am listening to, because that is what the committee asked me to do.
Yes.
So you could speak to witnesses, but there is no motion that allows for this at the moment, because there was no minimum on that amendment, on that unanimous motion. So I think you may speak, in which case, you know, you could speak to anything. You could read from the phone book if you want, Ms. Thomas. But the issue here is you talked a lot about good faith. If the good faith is for us to get on with this, if the good faith is for us to move with getting this bill to its amendments and to clause by clause, then let's do that and not just use your amendment to continue to just speak about anything or whatever you wish to speak. I already told you that there is an agreement on witnesses and on meetings. The meetings were 20 hours. The witnesses have been asked and called, and the witnesses have already spoken. We do not have any more meetings for witness hearings, Ms. Thomas. So we're talking about the motion brought by Mr. Bittle, which was a deadline for amendments. Now, I would like to hear if you propose 3 days before clause by clause. We do not have a deadline for clause by clause. So what is the deadline that those 3 days mean, Ms. Thomas? That is what you need to answer in your amendment. What do you mean by that deadline, 3 days before clause by clause? We have, in theory, and as a chair, I will tell you, we have finished what the committee asked me to do unanimously, which is to have 10 meetings, 20 hours within the week of this week, which is the 30th of May. That has been achieved. We should then move to clause by clause, and we should then set a deadline to for amendments so that we can do that. So this is what the orders of the day and the orders of this committee actually is intended to do. So I just wanted to let you know that and say that, you know, there is no room to discuss on your amendment anything to do with the number of witnesses that we have yet to hear. I have finished, Ms. Thomas.
Oh, thank you. So sorry, I just want to return back to something that you said. So I'm not allowed to talk about my motivation for this amendment, but I would be permitted to read from the phone book if I want. Correct?
Ms. Thomas, you know that that is something that you can do when you filibuster. But you are not on topic right now. We are supposed to debate your amendment to the motion that is still on the floor, Ms. Thomas. There is a motion on the floor that you are amending.
Yes, there is. There is a motion on the floor that I am amending. I am asking for additional time before amendments to C11 are due to the committee. It's hard to know when the start of clause by clause is going to begin. That is something that would have to be a further conversation by this committee, which again, that conversation would take place, I guess, at another time, because part of deciding when that clause by clause would begin would be for us to determine, have we heard from enough witnesses, or would we desire to hear from a few more? Again, there would be appetite on this side of the table, at least, to give time to a few more, to be able to hear from other Canadians who are going to be impacted by Bill C-11, who have not yet had an opportunity to add their voice. In front of me, I have a list of a total of 119 witnesses that were put forward to this committee to be considered, and And of those, there's 50 that, more than 50 actually, who have not yet had an opportunity to come speak. So if we were to decide to move clause by clause back a bit and to hear from those witnesses, then whenever we decided to set as that date for clause by clause considerations to commence, we would have to have our amendments in 3 days prior. That's my proposal. That's what's on the table right now for this committee to consider. And so I think, I'd love for us to have a conversation around that. And I guess whether or not that there would be appetite at this table for considering, giving a little more time for those amendments to be drafted so that we can thoroughly review the testimony that has been submitted in writing, as well as the testimony that has been granted here in person from those that have...
Point of order, it's Chris.
Yes, Mr. Biddle.
Just for clarification, there's only a few minutes left that the minister's here. This filibuster is
There's
now
no
going
point in
on
clarification.
into
This
its
is not a
second
point of order.
hour,
This
and I
is
think
debate.
we should hear from the minister.
Biddle, that is not a point of order.
Should have just voted yes. Will you ever learn?
The order of this meeting is to continue this debate. There was a question of adjourning the debate. The committee moved with a majority to continue the debate. So that is what, as chair, I have to do. So the order of the day is to continue this debate on the amendment. Ms. Thomas, when I actually stop speaking...
I can't hear you, Chair. Is it me?
I have no idea.
We can
Is there a
hear the
problem
chair.
with sound? Everyone can hear the chair, all right. So who is the person who said they couldn't hear me? Are you in the room or are you virtual?
I can't hear anyone. I'm going to sign out and sign in.
Oh, she's freezing.
Fine, Mr. Couture, you may do that. So, Ms. Thomas, when I have finished speaking, you may begin. You still have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, those of us on this side of the table had every intent of hearing from the minister today. And we do have every intent on being reasonable in terms of when amendments are due. That has been our position throughout this week as this topic of conversation has come forward. However, there seems to be a desire at this table to prolong, to keep delaying opportunity to hear from witnesses, in particular today to hear from the minister, who has graciously given us his time to speak to Bill C-11. And now it looks like we will not have that opportunity because a motion has been brought forward to the floor. And even though I moved that we suspend or adjourn debate, that motion was voted down by the members opposite. And so instead, they're insisting that we continue to have this debate on the motion that was brought forward to the floor.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
concerning
It's
amendments.
Chris again.
Yes, Chris.
Again, the minister's here.
Debate.
The vote will take a
Debate.
minute, and we can
Debate.
get going to hear the minister. He still has
Debate.
15 minutes here.
You had your chance.
You still-
Mr. Biddle.
Yes, Madam Chair.
That is not a point of order. The question was asked as to whether this debate should be adjourned to allow the minister to speak. The majority of this committee voted to continue with the debate. I am so sorry. I apologize profusely to the minister, but I have to do what the committee dictates that I do. So a point of order is that the order right now of what we're doing is to continue debate. Mr. Biddle, thank you.
Madam Chair, it's interesting to me that today in the House of Commons, the government House Leader actually said during question period that the Parliamentary Secretary should not interfere on committee business, and that's exactly what we see Mr. Biddle doing here over and over and over again.
Madam Chair, it's Chris Biddle. I have a point of order. This is actually a point of order.
Oh, you're acknowledging the other ones weren't.
Mr. Biddle.
This is Mr. Julian's motion that we're debating, and this is not the.
Sorry, point of order.
Madam Chair, I have the floor.
It's not.
Madam Chair, there's a lot of talk back and forth.
This is debate.
Ms. Thomas, I would appreciate it if you allow me to hear what is being proposed as a point of order before I can rule on whether it is a point of order or not.
It's fascinating that. Oh, sorry, Madam Chair. It's fascinating that Ms. Thomas is first to jump up and say that someone is interrupting her, but then will have no problem interrupting me. What the Parliamentary Secretary is doing has nothing to do with what the amendment is. It is not relevant to the debate, and Ms. Thomas should move on to the discussion. And again, we can get to the vote and still hear a little bit from the minister. He wants to speak, I'm sure.
Ms. Thomas. I think that was a point of order. It was a point of order asking us to get back to the order of this meeting, which is for you to speak to your amendment.
Thank you for that clarification, Madam Chair. Well, the amendment in front of us is that we would expand the time frame granted to be able to put forward amendments to Bill C-11. The reason I'm asking for that extra time is because I would like to propose that we hear from more witnesses. Now, I realize that right now we can't have that conversation. In good faith, I'd love to have that conversation, following voting on this amendment and the substance of the motion itself. And the reason for that, of course, is because I believe that we as parliamentarians have a responsibility to hear from a diverse set of voices before moving forward and making decisions with regard to this bill. The point of bringing a bill to committee is so that it can be spoken to by witnesses from various backgrounds, so that they can add their voice, which may be in support of various aspects of the bill, or perhaps the bill in whole, or it could...
Point of order?
Ms.
Anthony.
I have no idea who's got a point of order there. Anthony, go ahead.
Madam Chair, I'd call repetition. Ms. Thomas has repeated this verbatim 3 times now.
And I have told Ms. Thomas that it is not actually speaking to her amendment. Ms. Thomas is doing exactly what Ms. Thomas wishes to do, which is to drag this on. And so we will allow her. She has the floor. She can drag this on for as long as she wants. So I would like it to be very clear what is going on in this committee right now. Ms. Thomas, I have spoken over and over that the number of witnesses and the number of hours of public hearings for witnesses has been achieved as per a unanimous decision by this committee. Now, you have suggested in your amendment that we have 3 days before clause by clause. I have told you that we do not know what clause by clause is, but we do not have a lot of time to stretch anything out because this bill is supposed to be reported back to the House before June the 23rd. And so that's all I'm telling you. So can you continue to speak to your amendment or allow other people to speak to your amendment or against your amendment? Thank you.
Madam Chair, I do have to ask a question for clarification before continuing. You ascribed motivation as to why I'm speaking. I'm just wondering if you feel that that's most appropriate as a chair. Yes, Madam Chair. If you go back and review your words, you will realize that you ascribed motivation to me. You accused me of wanting to drag this on. Madam Chair, that is inappropriate.
Ms. Thomas, I have asked you numerous times to stick to the concept of a deadline for amendments, which is what your amendment to the motion is about. You have refused to do that. You have continued to speak to another issue that I have told you that you cannot speak to because it was already decided by this committee how many meetings we were going to have in public to listen to witnesses, and that has been achieved. You continue to pretend that I did not say that, and then I have to therefore wonder if you have another motivation other than speaking to your amendment.
Madam Chair, ascribing motivation to me is inappropriate.
Ms. Thomas, you have the floor. Please speak to your amendment.
Yes, Madam Chair, that is what I have been doing. And perhaps if we see differently on this, you could seek the counsel of the clerk.
Actually, your motion was moved, your amendment was moved in order because it did not change anything with the main motion. You cannot make an amendment that is going to change the main motion. So you were speaking to the main motion, which was about deadlines. And so I would like you to speak about deadlines. Thank you very much.
Yes, Madam Chair, I am speaking to deadlines, and I'm speaking to why I would like to see that deadline changed, which I believe is within the scope of the amendment that I have moved. If you and I see differently on this, I am happy to have this suspended for a moment while you seek clarity from the clerk.
I do not seek clarity from the clerk. Thank you very much.
Oh.
Shall you continue? You will continue, Ms. Thomas.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I'll also seek clarity on one other thing. You seemed quite firm that there's a certain date that we need to report this bill back to the House. That was never put forward to this committee. In fact, the extract from the journals of the House of Commons as of Thursday, May 12th says this: according to Bill C-11, an act to amend the Broadcasting Act and make related and consequential amendments to other acts was read the second time and referred to the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage, period. So within that, there is no deadline by which this committee has to report this bill back to the House. So, Madam Chair, I'm wondering if you have secret information that the rest of us are not privy to, and if so, why that hasn't been tabled for the committee to see it.
Ms. Thomas, you have suggested that we continue. I have orders from this committee. As a chair, I work on orders from the committee. The unanimous orders from this committee is that we have 10 meetings, equivalent to 20 hours, and that they end on the week of May the 30th. We are in that week. And so there is no suggestion that we have to continue to talk about anything. We know, and we all know, that the next step would be to go to amendments and clause by clause. I am asking that we continue to obey the orders of the day, which is that this bill, now that it's finished with its public hearings, go to amendments and go to clause by clause.
Madam Chair, again, the motion that was moved at this committee is that the committee hear witnesses on the topic of Bill C-11, an act to amend the Broadcasting Act and to make related and consequential amendments to other acts for one meeting lasting 5 hours during the week of May 23rd, 2022, that the committee continue to hear witnesses for an additional 3 meetings lasting 5 hours each during the week of May 30th, 2022, and that during the meeting of Tuesday, May 24th, 2022, no motion shall be moved. That is...
And every single one of that motion has been completed.
Madam Chair, I am seeking clarity, though, as to what part of that motion says that there is a hard stop and we have to get this back to the House by June 23rd. I don't read that in this motion, and so I'm just wondering if there's something that I have missed.
Lasting 5 hours, that the committee continue to hear witnesses for an additional 3 meetings lasting 5 hours each during the week of May the 30th, 2020. This is a week that we are now completing. And so those were the clear and detailed instructions in that motion.
Okay, so Madam Chair, I'm just clarifying.
It did not say a minimum of or any such thing. It said for the week of May the 30th, 2022 for additional meetings. Thank you.
Thank you. So it also doesn't say maximum. And the second point of clarification, just because I want to make sure that I have all of the information, because I feel like maybe there's some that I've missed. Was there an amendment made to this motion that means we have to report back to the House by June 23rd? Did I miss that?
No, you did not miss it, but I am suggesting that if we continue with the order of the day, which is to now move to amendments and to now move to clause by clause, that we will have finished it before the House rises. Because unless you would like us not to have any meetings further to this.
Okay, Madam Chair, thank you.
I'm talking about good faith here. This is good faith that was agreed on in this motion, and now you are backing down from that. And that is what I see, and I have to ask you why.
Madam Chair, the statement that you made just moments ago is that we had to get this done and back to the House by June 23rd. You made it sound very matter of fact, which I think you've just revealed is actually not in the motion. I have it directly in front of me as well. I don't read it there. You've just confirmed for me that there's not an amendment that I wasn't privy to. And so I do have to ask then, Madam Chair, is there, why would you state that we have to have this back by June 23rd if that is not in fact a decision made by this committee? Madam Chair, the response.
Rappel au règlement, Madame la Présidente, c'est Martin.
Point of order, it's Mr. Champoux.
Yes, Mr. Champoux?
Oui, mais...
Yes, please. Please don't insult Mr. Coteau by saying it's me. Saying it's him, rather. So my colleague is straying off topic of the amendment she's proposing. And whenever she does happen to stray back to it, she's repeating herself, and I believe, Madam Chair, you have the authority to force a vote on this subject, and then on the original motion, which will allow us to come back to the committee's motions of the day. Order of the day, rather.
Look, Mr. Champoux, I do have the authority. If the debate is being repetitive, and if in my nothing new is being gained by the continuing discussion, I could do that. That is not used very often, because quite often we depend on goodwill on committees to move forward according to the rules and according to the traditions. So I could do this, in which case I will ask for the vote to be called on the amendment and then the vote to be called on the main motion.
Point of order. Madam Chair,
Ms. Thomas.
Madam Chair, you can dictatorially decide to move past me, but you have to hear from the rest of the people that are on the list to speak. However, I would ask that you be respectful of the fact that I do hold the floor and that I have been respectful as to this motion and speaking to it on topic. And if we disagree on that, then I would ask that you consult with the clerk.
Ms. Thomas, you don't have to ask that I do anything. I am the chair of this committee, and I know the rules. And Mr. Champoux, it's absolutely right about the rule that allows me to end your speaking because you are continuing to repeat the same things. I have not done that yet. I have given you a lot of leeway to continue to repeat yourself. Ms. Thomas.
Point of order.
Yes, Mr. Julian.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. I've seen a ton of repetition. I would argue relevance as well. You do have the ability to enforce committees, and in this case, of course, during the Harper years, of course, it was systematic.
Madam Chair, this is not a point of order. This is debate.
Harper chairs would ensure. I'm being heckled by Ms. Thomas.
Yes, Chair. This is debate. This is debate.
Order, please.
Debate. Debate.
Would you like to be the chair of this committee?
Yes.
You can continue to speak over me and above me and over anyone else who continues to speak. And this shows a lack of respect for your colleagues. Now, Mr. Julian is speaking. It is a point of order because he is speaking to the issue of your amendment, and you are speaking, and he is suggesting that you are repeating yourself and that it is time to ask you to step down from your debate. Now, that is a rule. That is a rule of committees. The chair can do that.
Point of order,
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
yes,
when you have
Mr.
time.
Coteau.
Sorry.
Mr. Coteau?
Can I just Can I just say it is past 5:45 and the minister's been waiting for an hour. Can we just agree, or through you, Chair, to thank the minister and hopefully we can hear from him in the future, but to let him leave and let the witnesses know that the minister was here and he was prepared to speak to the issue. And I just want to say thank you to him and the department for being here, and sorry for wasting his time on behalf of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Coteau. I would like to say to the minister, I apologize profusely that you must leave. I know at 5:45 you have always indicated that you had to do that. And I would thank you for your patience and for waiting. And I would like to ask you to come again to present to us, except I have no idea what is going to happen to this committee and whether we should be meeting again at another time or whether we will continue to debate the amendment to the motion for the next set of meetings. So thank you very much, Minister.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have to say that I'm very disappointed that I didn't have the chance to speak today.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, it's Mr. Julian. I just wanted to complete my point of order, if I might.
Go ahead, Mr. Julian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I was citing relevance. I was as well citing repetition. And the reality is you have the ability to
but this is debate,
make that
Madam
decision.
Chair.
I'm being, again,
He is debating what is going on here. He is debating.
Rappel au règlement sur le rappel.
Point of order on the point of order.
Whoever is.
Madam Chair, I would simply like to ask our colleagues to be careful and keep your voices down. We have interpreters who don't deserve to have people shouting in their ears. Thank you.
Who for thinking of the interpreters?
Thank you very much, Clerk. Thank you. I agree with you.
Sorry, Madam Chair, just to complete. So you have the ability to make that decision, to make that call that we move to the vote because of repetition. And of course,
point of order. Point of order.
Of course, I will
point of order. You can't move directly to the vote. There's a
and
speaking
of course, Madam Chair,
there is a point of order. Can people please mute the table mic? That's how come the shouting is going on.
Yes.
Because now, Mr. Julian.
The Conservatives have been extraordinarily unruly, and that behavior is really unacceptable. The reality is you have the ability to make that decision. Ms. Thomas has the ability, of course, to appeal the decision of the chair, and committee will decide. And I would impress upon you, Madam Chair, that you make that decision. And if Ms. Thomas disagrees, she can basically challenge the chair, and the committee will decide.
Point of order.
Julian. Yes, who has a point of order?
Rick
I have
Perkins.
no idea who it is.
Perkins.
Yes, Mr. Perkins. Yes, Mr. Perkins.
Just to clarify, the chair, if she wants to impose some sort of censure or closure, she can only do it on the speaker, not on the speaker's list. She cannot move directly to the vote, is my understanding.
I'm sorry, I didn't get what you were saying, Mr. Perkins. Can you please repeat?
Certainly, Madam Chair. Mr. Julian suggested that on his point of order that he could go or you could go directly to the vote. I don't believe that to be the case in the rules. You have the power, if you choose, the extraordinarily and rarely used power to stop a member from speaking. I would suggest that that's not appropriate this time, but you do not have, as I understand it, the power to go straight to the vote and ignore the speaking list on this motion.
I agree with you. That is, we are speaking, and I thought I understood Mr. Julian and Mr. Housefather, who intervened earlier on with regard to repetition, that I am speaking about a particular member who is being repetitive. And that is what I have the power to do. And so what I think I will do is ask this member not to continue with her, which has been so repetitive that I think I can repeat everything that the member has said. And I would like to move to the next in line to continue the debate on the amendment that was raised by Ms. Thomas. And Clerk, I do not know whose hands are up in order to do that.
Yes, Madam Chair. So the speaking order was Mr. Perkins, Mr. Patzer, Mr. Upal. Those are the hands that I've seen for now.
Thank you.
Point of order.
Mr. Perkins.
Point of order.
Mr. Perkins. I don't know who raised the
It's
point
MP
of order.
Patzer. It's MP Patzer. I just,
Yes.
Madam Chair, I just feel that because there's multiple points of order on my colleague, and she was unable to establish what she was actually trying to say because she was continually cut off. And I think she was trying to just establish the reasoning and the rationale for the sub-amendment, which is perfectly in order. She was speaking to the reasonings for the sub-amendment, why the sub-amendment is important, and I do think that it would be inappropriate to end her chance to speak at this point in time because she was speaking to the relevance of the sub-amendment, and I think that that Mrs. Thomas should be able to continue to speak.
I hear you, Mr. Perkins, but I have ruled. Thank you. Mr. Upal? Or Mr. I have no idea.
It was
Mr. Perkins, please.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I am very disappointed that you chose to shut off the discussion of the mover of the motion, who was constantly interrupted by both the NDP and Liberal members, preventing her from getting to her point. So the question going forward is the sub-amendment, or the amendment, I should say, on the amount of time that's given to committee members to put forward amendments to this important piece of legislation. And we've already seen excessive use of closure in the House by the government with the support of their partner, the NDP, 31 times, I believe it is, in 6 months or 7 months. And they did it in this bill. In fact, yesterday, I think they did it, or 2 days ago, they did it on a piece of legislation in the House after one opposition speaker and 2 hours of debate.
Point of order, Madam Chair, it's Chris Biddle.
Yes, Mr. Biddle.
This very much isn't relevant. I'm sorry that interrupting the Conservatives, but they aren't relating it back to the amendment. This is well outside the scope of the amendment. And if Mr. Perkins could get
perhaps
back to
if Mr. Biddle had actually been listening instead of going through his phone, he might have heard the introduction to what I was saying, which is the issue of amendment and only allowing now less than 24 hours to amend a very extensive bill obviously is consistent with the government and their partner, the NDP's desire to end democracy in any legislation and have any scrutiny over a bill that continues to have closure.
Point of order.
Julian.
Yeah, I would cite relevance here, Madam Chair, but he's also factually incorrect. He knows he can bring amendments forward even up to consideration of clause by clause. So on relevance, and I'm seeing repetition from the Conservatives, I would call this again on repetition and on relevance, and you have the ability, of course, to make a decision on the committee's behalf, Madam Chair.
Mr. Julian, I made the decision on behalf of one. Can people please mute the mics on the floor? I cannot even hear myself speak. Thank you very much. Now, I made a ruling as a chair on Ms. Thomas's relevance and repetition. Mr. Perkins has just begun to speak. I cannot accuse him of either at the moment, but Mr. Perkins knows that he needs to be speaking to the amendment, and I think he's doing so as far as I can hear. Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, as I was saying, I'll start again because clearly the members weren't hearing what I was saying. So, we're dealing with an amendment here to the proposal by the government with their NDP partners to limit the amount of time on a very large and important bill that deals with freedom of speech on the internet, about the amount of time that members of Parliament have to put forward amendments on this committee, limiting it to 24 hours. Now, that's consistent, as I said, with the approach they've been taking with closure on this bill and many others in the House. And I would suggest that the most important part of the legislative process, obviously, is the ability to study clause by clause, to hear from witnesses in committee, and to propose amendments. It's really quite appalling that the government chooses to want to limit debate on their bill and the scrutiny of the public on their bill and the proposals that one might make on amendments. And in terms of committees, and perhaps the interfering parliamentary secretary would prefer to...
Mr. Cotto, can you just stick to what you're saying?
Yeah, Mr.
I think
Cotto.
casting aspersions on our colleagues is not something we have a tendency to do in this committee. Thank you.
Well, I've heard lots of it already today with regard to my colleague, Ms. Thomas, but I will move forward on the issue of the closure that the government is trying to do in the limited time that the government is trying to do in terms of allowing for amendments on a very important bill on freedom of speech. It's kind of ironic that a bill on that limits freedom of speech on the internet is having a limited time for amendments and a limited time for witnesses to actually comment. And the chair said, as is the case in other committees, that this committee is in charge of its own destiny. And when I look at the past comments around the 20 hours, I saw that Mr. Julian said that that was a good start and a minimum. Mr. Nader said that we could revisit that partway through. And I think that's what Ms. Thomas is saying in regards to moving the time frame for amendments, which would provide more time for witnesses to hear the minister, who the government decided not to hear from him today by rejecting the opportunity to adjourn the debate on this motion to hear from the minister. The NDP and the Liberal members decided to vote to continue this debate and then ironically say, well, somehow that we're delaying the debate when it is they themselves that voted to continue this debate where we were willing to adjourn it. So perhaps what I could add and consider going forward on this, and yes, I did speak to this bill on February 28th in the House, and asked to join today to be able to question the minister and to be able to participate in this because it is an important bill and more time is needed. So I was surprised that the Liberals are trying to limit the debate on the amendments. So I will continue to put forward.
I don't know whose point of
It's
order,
Chris.
but there you go. Yes, Chris.
Thank you so much.
I think
This
it's
is-
probably-
Mr. Perkins is speaking about everything but the amendment in the motion.
I
So
have the
it is
floor.
not
I'm allowed to
relevant
speak on what I want.
He's trying to talk over me, Madam Chair, but it's he has to keep his comments to, if he's going to filibuster, he's got to do it properly. And he needs to be relevant to the subject matter, and that is the amendment that's before us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Biddle. So I accept that as a point of order. So, Mr. Perkins, you still have the floor.
I do, and I'm leading up to a point where I think all members would be enlightened by the opportunity to hear from more witnesses, to understand that the time frame that's being imposed by the government on this amendment limits the ability to do so that the committee has control of its own destiny and can choose to amend it. In fact, in the committees that I sit on the Fisheries Committee, 3 times, including on a study put forward by the NDP, we extended it for witnesses. We extended the amendment time on the study on the study that we did on the fire on the container ships in Vancouver Harbor. We extended the time for amendments on several of our studies, and in fact, on the current study, we've decided to hear from more witnesses than we originally agreed to, and we'll extend the hearing till the fall. So this isn't an unusual thing that happens.
Mr. Perkins.
Yes.
You, with all due respect, this committee has the ability to make its own decisions. It made a decision in writing in a motion in English and French that we were to continue to have hearings to amount to 15 extra hours the week of May the 30th. We have fulfilled that. So to continue to ask for that kind of change from what the committee unanimously agreed to, and to comment on that, I think is outside of your purview right now because you were not here when we passed that motion. I am guided by the unanimous motion passed by this committee. And so the motion amendment that Ms. Thomas brought forward has to do with a deadline for amendments. And I would prefer that we listen to that debate on a deadline for amendments, please. And by the way, I would like to point out and remind this committee that we have been trying to get this deadline, not today, but since Monday. This committee has had a business meeting to try to bring forward a deadline for amendments. That would have given us Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, 5 days to make this decision. Each time this was brought up, there was an intervention that prevented us from getting to that particular vote. So this is not something that is new and that suddenly came up today. Now, Mr. Perkins, you may continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a little issue with the perspective that you shared with the committee that somehow as a member of Parliament who is substituting into this committee, that somehow my thoughts or my opinion on what should happen going forward and what's happened in the past somehow is of less value to others. I am a member of this committee today.
I did not say that. But you were not here when you made it sound like this is something that is happening today. This has been going on now since Monday. This committee has been trying to get one thing, and that is a deadline for amendments. And each time that motion was to come to a vote, it has not been allowed to occur. I'm just giving you that piece of information.
And
that's all.
And I appreciate that. The democratic right of members of Parliament to put forward ideas to move committees forward or change that. That's part of the committee has its own right and destiny to go forward. And so there is always opportunities to adjust that. In fact, it happens in most committees that happens. But as such, I would propose a sub-amendment to the amendment. And that sub-amendment would be to extend the date in order to, as outlined by Ms. Thomas, in order to allow for more witnesses, including the appearance of the minister at a later date.
I don't think you can move a sub-amendment while there is an amendment on the floor.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. That's the purpose. I have the floor. I have the ability to move a sub-amendment to an amendment.
You can, but I don't know that the chair can recognize it.
Well, that would be very unusual under parliamentary rules. Perhaps you should check. Perhaps you should check with the clerk.
I am checking. I'm checking the rules at the moment on that issue. But
would you care to suspend while you check with the clerk, please?
Yes, please, please. I'd like to suspend for lots of reasons other than checking with the clerk. I think it is time for everyone to have some kind of refreshment break or whatever break, because we have a hard stop for this committee to end. And then when we get to that stop, there will be no other room, and no one to carry on meetings. Just wanted you to know that. And I'm just suggesting that the committee ends at 6:45, hard stop, room is closed, and all of the staff leave. Thank you very much. So suspend for 1 minute, 2 minutes. Thank you. Okay, we will resume the debate. I would need to hear from Mr. Perkins what exactly his sub-amendment is before I can rule it in order. It has to deal with the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the clerk has it typed out in front of her. She could
Read
either
it?
email it or read it. Yeah.
Clerk, could you please read this amendment?
Yes. So I can perhaps read the motion with Mrs. Thomas' amendment.
Yes,
so that
please.
was that the deadline for amendments be 3 days prior to clause by clause. And then the sub-amendment would be to add, and after the minister appears before committee.
All right. Okay, well, that sub-amendment is in order. So we will entertain debate on the sub-amendment, please.
Well, I speak to my amendment first, I believe.
Yeah, so
yes, I said yes, obviously you have to speak to it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the sub-amendment to add clarity to the amendment, which appears to be what some of the members around this table were seeking, provides a little more rationale as to why the date for submitting amendments to the Act should be 3 days after the clause in order that we can hear from additional witnesses and from the minister, who unfortunately had to leave as a result of the unwillingness of the government to adjourn this very debate that we're having. So I think it's important that we hear from
Point of order. I do not think that was a sub-amendment that the clerk read. She did not read "and for other witnesses."
That's what I gave the clerk.
Well, the clerk said 3 days after the after the deadline that was in the original amendment, and after the minister has appeared.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I was aware. Just a moment.
It?
I was aware. I thought I had done that, but apparently it's not there, and that's okay. It says the leader.
And that's why I ruled your sub-amendment admissible.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right.
So, Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Housefather.
I was just wondering, Madam Chair, can the clerk please then circulate the sub-amendment by email to everybody so we could all have it in front of us, because I have essentially very little understanding of where the substitution is.
I would be supportive of that. We could suspend the meeting until we all get that, and I would appreciate getting a copy as well, please.
And I would remind the committee that we have a hard stop for the staff to leave and for the room to be emptied at 6:48. So I suspend for the clerk to send the sub-amendment to everyone.
How long will you suspend for, Chair?
Point of order.
Mr. Julian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to state for the record through you to the clerk that we will be submitting our amendments tomorrow at 4 p.m. Just the same, we believe it's fundamentally important that staff are respected, and so as a result of that, I'm giving you this information that the NDP will be submitting our amendments for tomorrow at 4 p.m. We've been working on them diligently as we've been hearings. It's important to be able to do two things at once, Madam Chair, both hear from witnesses but also incorporate the information that they've been providing. And so we will be submitting.
Thank you very much, Mr. Julian. That's good news indeed, and I think that the legislative clerk, etc. Really
Rappel au règlement, Madame la Présidente.
Appreciate it. Yes.
C'est Martin ici.
I wish, please.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
We have an order coming here, and I would wish that people would please mute their mics on the floor so that I don't have to listen to myself shout into a big room. Mr. Shampoo.
Oui,
Yes, we do like to hear you speak, Madam Chair. But with that said, I'm not really sure if... I'm not sure if it was a point of order, so I'm not sure if I should make a point of order or a point of information, but I wanted to say that the Bloc Québécois has also been working for many days on amendments, and we will also table C11 amendments by tomorrow, Friday, at 4 p.m., since we have trying to get that motion adopted for some time. It's very important to move forward with this bill, so we will be ready, and we will submit those amendments by Friday, tomorrow, 4 p.m.
Order, it's Chris Biddle.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shampoo. Mr. Biddle?
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And further to what Martin said, and I don't know that this is a point of order or point of information, but we will also be submitting our amendments by 4 o'clock tomorrow.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, so I am resuming the
point of order.
The sub-amendment, yes.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. It's Anthony. I was just going to ask you to rule on whether or not the sub-amendment was receivable. I think it's void due to uncertainty. It does not suggest what minister is supposed to appear before the committee, and given the fact that there are many ministers, I don't believe that amendment is receivable. I think it's void due to uncertainty. Thank you.
All right. You have heard, I think that is a point of order, and perhaps we will have to rule that sub-amendment out because it does not specify the minister. So it's unclear.
Sorry, point of order, Madam Chair. It's Tom Kimmich here.
Somebody spoke.
It's Tom Kimmich here, Madam Chair. You already ruled that the sub-amendment was in order. You cannot then change your mind afterwards. You made a ruling as a chair of the committee. And so we have to deal with the sub-amendment, and we already started debate on it with Mr. Perkins. You cannot then go back and change it, just like in the chamber when speakers make a ruling. They cannot go back and change that ruling after the fact.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Informing me of what I can and cannot do. Thank you very much. I would like to suggest that we have a member of this committee challenging that I should not have ruled it in order for a very specific reason of clarification of which minister. So I am entertaining that as a point of clarification. We have had people raising points of clarification during the course of hearings on SIL C11. People wanted things in writing. They wanted it in both official languages because they did not understand what it meant. So a member is now suggesting that he did not understand what the sub-amendment means. The sub-amendment is not necessarily not in order, but there is a point of clarification being raised by one of our colleagues, and I am listening to it, and Mr. Perkins also heard it. So while in theory this sub-amendment is in order, I think that degree of uncertainty about which minister is a very important point. So
Point of order, Madam Chair. It's Tom Kimmich again.
Yes, Tom
So,
Kimmich.
on a procedural matter, you have made a ruling as a chair, and there was debate already commenced by Mr. Perkins, and therefore you had ruled that the summons was in order. The member, Anthony, for I have a great amount of respect for him, and him and I have talked many times, a great shared love for Yiddish proverbs, but he. On the merits of the sub-amendment, he can debate the merits of it, and perhaps the confusion doesn't say specific minister in there, although colloquially we all know who we're speaking of. On a procedural matter, if you look to the book, you have already made a ruling. You've determined that it was, in fact, in order. Debate had commenced, and now a member is saying they didn't understand the sub-amendment that had been sent around by the clerk. He is free when the moment comes to vote down the sub-amendment, but the ruling you had made initially is the ruling that now is binding on the committee. That's my understanding of how the procedures are to work, and I would welcome if you were to consult with the clerk on this matter if you so chose to, but since we've started debate on it, we should thereafter continue debate on it until the matter is resolved with a vote either recorded or on division.
Point of order? Point of order,
Just a minute,
Anthony?
I would like to answer Mr. Kimich's point. And that point is simply this. We did not begin debate on the sub-amendment. We were just passing the sub-amendment around. And before...
A point of order, Madam Chair. This is MP Perkins. I had started and was speaking to my sub-amendment when I was interrupted with a point of order, which were really just points of information and not points of order on their purpose, or their desire to put in their own amendments, which is fine. But I had started my... if you check the blues, and if you want to suspend, to ask the clerk to check the record that I had started my explanation of my sub-amendment.
Mr. Perkins, you had not. Everyone asked you to...
Point of order.
I will challenge your ruling on that, and I would ask the clerk to check the record.
I would like order, please. Order. Thank you very much. Now, I would like to suggest that we suspended so that we could not accept your ruling, and I asked you to send it so it can be very clear. You sent it to the clerk in both official languages. The clerk then sent it to everyone else. Not everyone in the room had received it. Mr. Knish and somebody else had not, I think you, had not received it. So you had not really begun debate. I had not really said that it was in order until I got to read it. And that all happened after a suspended moment. Now, before you began to discuss your sub-amendment, Mr. Housefather asked for some clarity.
That's totally incorrect, Madam Chair. You ruled it in order.
Well,
I was speaking. I did. I challenged you because I was speaking when three members of this committee, I had been about 2 to 3 minutes into my presentation on my sub-amendment when Mr. Julian and the member from the bloc and the parliamentary secretary chose to interrupt with pseudo points of order when they in fact were just points of information, which you allowed, but I had already started my explanation of the sub-amendment, and if you would look and suspend in order to check with the clerk, I'm sure the clerk will confirm that.
Well, I will ask the clerk to confirm those minutes, because I can tell you I may have just had a blackout right there when you were speaking, because I did not hear you begin debate. I had points of order coming from everyone at the moment before you began debate. Clerk, may I get some clarity on this, please?
Well, just to go back to the challenge of the chair's ruling. So you had ruled the sub-amendment in order. The point of order challenging your decision made by Mr. Housefather was not done immediately after your ruling. So it really is up to you to determine if the challenge can be accepted. But usually a challenge has to be made right when the ruling happens. In this case, we had several point of orders before Mr. Housefather's point of order.
But we did have points of order before Mr. Housefather, and I think each point of order would clarify themselves or check themselves by saying that they were points of information. Thank you. And so now...
Point of order, Madam Chair. I think for the benefit of the committee, I would like to just add in that Mr. Perkins had started his deliberations. Now, there was some confusion because he had thought he had talked about a specific part of the sub-amendment that was different from what it was. So we got that clarified, and then he started again into it, and then that's when the point of orders had happened. So it was very clear that the debate had begun, and then there was points of order, and then there was then Mr. Housefather brought his point in. So Mr. Perkins, and again, I'm sitting right beside him, so I heard him. He did, in fact, start debate on his sub-amendment. And as he started, I then turned to the clerk to make sure I could get on the speaking list as well. So Mr. Perkins did, in fact, begin his debate on this sub-amendment. Thank you.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Housefather.
I'm so sorry, Madam Chair. I know this is very trying and you're doing an incredible job under the circumstances. What I wanted to say was that when I heard the debate begin, I was the one that raised the point of order and asked for a copy to be sent to all members because I was unclear on what had been raised. As soon as I had received the document and had the opportunity to look at it, then points of order were being raised by other people, but no debate had ensued on the amendment before I raised the issue that I believe amendment is vague and uncertain and therefore should not be receivable. So I do think, well, I hate to say it would be a challenge to the chair. I didn't think you had ruled in the first place. I think either that you should make a ruling or my challenge should be allowed because I don't think that there was any opportunity to make it otherwise.
Point of order.
I agree with you, Mr. Housefather, that you had, when you were about to raise your challenge, that we had 3 points of order, one after the other, and that I did not hear Mr. Perkins begin debate.
Point of order, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, point of order.
May I finish? I know you have a point of order, and I will come to you for your point of order. But I would like to at least finish my sentences sometimes. Thank you. So we're going to move forward with the challenge by Mr. Housefather.
My point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes, go ahead. I don't know whose point of order it is.
Sorry, it's Rick Perkins. Madam Chair, it was clear if you would suspend and ask the clerk to look at the blues or look at the record that you had ruled my sub-amendment in order and that the debate led by me had started.
Mr. Perkins, if you recall, I had said that I would like to look at your sub-amendment to see if it was in order. And I did not get it from the clerk until she sent it to everyone. We did not decide on anything because you and your colleagues said you had not received the amendment. And as soon as everyone had received it, points of order were raised from the floor so that you did not begin debate, Mr. Perkins.
Well, Madam Chair, I challenged you on this before, that I had begun, you had ruled it in order, I had begun debate, I was well into it. There were 3 points of order of members saying that they were going to introduce their amendments after I had started the debate, after you had ruled my sub-amendment in order. I had begun my explanation of it when I was interrupted by 3 of the committee members on points of information, which were points of order. Just a moment, please, if I could finish. And then we all had the motion. It had all been sent to us. You confirmed to all of us. You asked me and you asked Mr. Kimmich if we had it. You had it. You ruled it in order. You asked me to begin debate on my sub-amendment. I began that. So I had the floor, and there were interruptions of points of order that weren't points of order. And so your ruling that we hadn't started a debate is incorrect.
My ruling may not be incorrect.
I wish you would look at the clerk and the blues, please.
I would like to finish speaking, Mr. Perkins. There is a real problem here, that I can only begin 2 words in a sentence before I am cut off. Now, I would like to ask the clerk to tell me if debate had begun. I do not have the blues in front of me, and I cannot see exactly what happened.
Well, you have the ability, Madam Chair, it's Mr. Perkins, to suspend and ask the clerk about that, and I would ask that you do so.
I do not have to suspend to do that. The clerk is about to answer me. Thank you.
I do not have the blues in front of me either. The only thing I would advise is that there was a challenge to your ruling. From what I understand, you accepted that challenge to your ruling. That if you accept a challenge, it is non-debatable. So technically, we should go to a vote on the challenge of your decision. And then once that is resolved, then you can move forward.
Thank you, Chair.
Point
Now,
of
Mr.
clarification,
House
so just so I can follow that ruling, I also challenged the chair, but which challenge is the clerk talking about? Is this the one for Mr. Horsfeather, the Liberal Member of Parliament who's challenging the chair of this committee? Is that correct? So we're voting on whether to accept the Liberal Member of Parliament's challenge to the chair of the Heritage Committee. It's ruling. This is the clarification I'm seeking, whether it's my challenge or the challenge of the Liberal Member of Parliament to the chair, which I believe Mr. Horsfeather challenged the chair's ruling. Horsfeather.
Excuse me,
with
I would
respect,
like...
the member could leave.
I apologize, Mr. Housefather.
Right.
You know that his
Apologize,
name is
Mr. Housefather.
Mr. Perkins. Thank you. Now, the challenge that was before yours was Mr. Housefather. So there is no debate on Mr. Housefather's challenge, and it would, because he said that he challenged me because he felt that my ruling on your amendment was not, because your amendment was not clear as to which minister. Now, let's call the vote on that. Clerk, sorry, you have your hand up.
Now, just to clarify, if I understand this correctly, Madam Chair, you, whether the debate resumed or not, I believe you ruled the sub-amendment admissible, to which Mr. Housefather, after reading the written copy of the sub-amendment, challenged your decision on that ruling, in which case there should be no debate and we should proceed to a vote. And the question is, shall the decision of the chair be sustained? So basically, should the decision of the chair to rule the sub-amendment admissible be sustained? Is that correct?
I think that is very correct. Thank you very much, Clerk.
So I may proceed.
So will we proceed? Yes, you can proceed. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. So, Mr. Biddle?
No.
Mr. Coteau?
No.
Ms. Hefner?
Contre.
Against.
Other?
No.
Mr. Lewis?
No.
Mr. Perkins?
I support the chair's ruling.
Mr. Kimmich?
I vote yes.
Mr. Upal?
I vote yes.
Mr. Patzer?
I vote yes.
Monsieur Champoux?
No.
No.
Mr. Julian?
No.
No. So that is 7 nays and 4 yeas. So the ruling of the chair is not sustained.
So that Mr. Housefather's challenge stands.
Yes, so we go back to debate on the amendment.
Yes.
Or go back to, you
Mr.
open the floor again.
Yes, Mr. Housefather, begin, please.
No, I'm sorry, that's incorrect. I had the floor. It's Mr. Perkins.
On the amendment.
On the amendment.
Are we debating Mr. Perkins's amendment or Mr.
No, I was
Housefather's challenge,
debating.
you mean?
I was debating the Ms. Thomas's amendment, and I had the floor when I also proposed a sub amendment. So I believe I still have the floor.
Thank you. Go ahead then.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So now we're back onto the amendment, as I understand it, which is the amendment to have the time for amendments to Bill C-11 extended to 3 days before clause by clause. And as I was saying, that the reason that we should be doing this is to allow for the time, and I appreciate that other parties are willing to look at submitting their amendments before the list of witnesses were expired, but we believe that there is an opportunity and a time that we need as a party to prepare the appropriate amendments to a very complex bill on an important piece of legislation, the Broadcasting Act, which is not being reviewed by Parliament or had a major amendment in 31 years, as I understand it. The ability to rush this through by the government and their dance partner, the NDP, I think, is a difficult situation that doesn't allow the opposition to do its due diligence that needs to be done on behalf of Canadians to
Point of
consider
order,
the
Madam Chair, it's
appropriate
Chris.
amendments to the bill. Now, as
Mr.
such,
Biddle?
Thank you so
Mr.
much,
Biddle?
Madam Chair. I know Mr. Perkins is new to this committee, but we've been through 5 weeks' worth of committee meetings. The government has not rushed through anything, and we are a minority government. We cannot rush through anything on our own. And I know he's new, new MP, new to this committee today, but I think the record
this
needs
is
to
a
be set
point of
straight.
debate. So, the disingenuous comments by the parliamentary secretary with regard to well, it's disingenuous and rude. I will admit both that it is both. So,
Point of order,
Yes, I don't know who
Mr.
has raised-
Julian. Mr. Julian, yeah.
Yes, Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, I would certainly challenge Mr. Perkins both on relevance. He's being repetitive already, and factually, of course, incorrect. There's been the
This is
equivalent
debate,
of
Madam
5
Chair.
weeks of
I would
parliamentary
argue that
hearings,
this is
and
debate.
many of them were disrupted
I'm
by the
sorry,
Conservatives.
excuse me. I am going to have to call order to this meeting. Mr. Julian is on the floor with a point of order. I cannot hear a word he's saying because somebody else is speaking. Please mute your mics when you are not speaking. Thank you, Mr. Julian. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I appreciate you bringing the very unruly Conservatives to order. They've disrupted these hearings repeatedly and filibustered through so that we've been unable to hear witnesses. I think it's fair to say that the 5 weeks that we all agreed to, the 5-week equivalent of hearings, is something that could have been used more effectively if the Conservatives hadn't been sabotaging repeatedly those hearings. But I do question Mr. Perkins both on relevance and on repetition. He doesn't seem to be speaking to the motion on the table.
well, I appreciate
Thank you, Mr. Julian.
I appreciate that the deputy government House leader has given me about 2 minutes to speak on this amendment, and therefore it's pretty hard to believe that I had reputation. But as such, Madam Chair,
Mr. Perkins, I would like to bring some respect to this particular meeting. There has been a great deal of disrespect in this meeting and no order being kept. But I would like to suggest that if you would like to refer to your colleagues with any kind of pejorative statements, why don't we just stick to saying Mr. Julian, that's who he is, the member of the NDP, and let's not go into this sort of negativity that continues to happen in this committee, and I don't like it. It's not appropriate.
I appreciate that, Madam Chair, and in order to address Mr. Julian's concern, therefore, I'm willing to propose another sub-amendment to add clarity at the end of the motion to say that the time for amendments be extended until we've had an opportunity to hear from the Minister of Canadian Heritage and departmental officials.
Thank you. Has the clerk had that clarity put in? And can we now read the new sub-amendment? And may I just let everyone know that we are coming close to having to adjourn this meeting. We have 3 minutes left.
Yes, Madam
Yes,
Chair.
Clerk. Go ahead.
So just before I read the sub-amendment, I just want to point out that I just want to let you know that the legislative clerk may want to have a clarification on something. So if you could recognize him some time before the end of the meeting, that would be appreciated. Meanwhile,
Yes.
I will read out the new sub-amendment moved by Mr. Perkins. So that the deadline for amendments be 3 days prior to clause by clause, and until we have the opportunity to hear from the Minister of Canadian Heritage and department officials from Canadian Heritage.
and department officials, all right? Okay, good. Now, I think that sub-amendment is in order. Mr. Housefather, do you think it's clear enough for you?
Thanks for asking, Madam Chair. I don't understand the word until. I would think it would be after, but I leave that to you. I don't have it in writing again.
Yes, well, maybe the clerk can send it to us in writing, please. And I'll suspend until that happens.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had just a question for Mr. Julian. I heard that Mr. Biddle and Mr. Champoux will have their amendments ready tomorrow to be submitted to the clerk of the committee. But I think I heard Mr. Julian saying that he would send his amendment to the law clerk's office. Am I mistaken? Or they will be ready and be sent to the clerk of the committee rather than the drafter?
Vous m'avez...
You completely misunderstood me. I said that we would send that at 4 p.m. tomorrow to the clerk of the committee. Perfect. And if I may ask another question, should I distribute the amendments that I will receive tomorrow, Madam Chair?
Sorry, I was in French suddenly. Sorry.
That's all right.
The question was, should I distribute the amendments that I would have received tomorrow?
I don't. If you're getting them at 4 p.m. tomorrow, Mr. Mellor, will you be able to distribute them, or would you wait until Monday? I don't know. That's up to you. You only you know what your time allows you to do in terms of any kind of translation or anything that is needed.
Okay, let's see what I can do, and I'll send them as soon as I can.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miller.
You're welcome.
Now, have you sent the wording, please, clerk?
Yes, it has been sent.
I would like to ask the committee if they have all received the wording.
This is Rick Perkins. Yes, Madam Chair, I have it. I don't know what the others.
If someone has not received it, please speak now. It would seem that everyone has received it. And maybe in both official languages, it has been received. And perhaps just for clarification, the clerk can read it once more before we rule on it.
So the full motion, including the sub-amendment, reads that the deadline for amendments be 3 days prior to clause by clause and after the committee has the opportunity to hear from the Minister of Canadian Heritage and department officials.
That seems to me, yes, somebody's raising a point of order before I even speak.
Yeah, it's Rick Perkins. Just a point of order, Madam Chair.
Is
I believe.
Not your sub-amendment?
Yes, it is, but I believe we're beyond the allotted time, so I'm not sure if we can continue to deal with the your ruling on the amendment.
I will make that decision. All right. So
you need unanimous consent, I believe, to go beyond the 2 hours.
You know, Mr. Perkins, I am speaking at the moment. Now, thank you. Did everybody get the sub-amendment that Mr. Perkins sent in both official languages? Yes? Would you like me to rule on it now, or will I entertain a motion to adjourn? Because we have to leave this room. Then I will move that the meeting be adjourned. Thank you.